Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank all of the dungeons in The Legend of Zelda. After learning the new wave bossa nova from the newly hatched children of Lulu, the Zora singer, we play the song and awaken her lost voice as she joins us for a little duet. This summons some weird, sorta giant turtle guy. This is all pretty goofy. And the turtle can take us to the Great Bay Temple, which is the source of the curse that has befallen Great Bay, as well as the location of the next guardian we need to set free. Meanwhile, the egg-thieving pirates fail miserably to get to the temple in a pretty funny cutscene. But in Great Bay Temple, here we find one of the most thematically distinct dungeons we have yet to encounter. Great Bay is some sort of factory mixed with dungeon. Water flows through these pipes and pumps as it's used to move machinery all throughout the dungeon. The music perfectly encapsulates this, as it's made up of a lot of different types of percussive sounds that sound like the churning and banging of machinery, pumping of water. In many of the rooms too, I think maybe all of them, you kind of get this low hum of the mechanics that is kind of this white noise that sort of blends in with the soundtrack. And the mechanical nature is what this dungeon is entirely designed around, creating another fairly unique challenge. Again, we have another large central room, this time with this spinning water wheel, and it's controlled by these pumps that are in a connecting room. And depending on which color pump is on, it spins the wheel in a different direction, altering the flow of the water in that room. This will make different offshoot rooms in the water chamber available depending on which way the water is pushing and flowing. Initially in the dungeon, it's only possible for the water to go one way, as we only have the yellow pump active. Through navigating and finding switches to allow the water to flow through these red pipes all the way back to the original control room, we're able to activate the red pump and then turn off the yellow pump to get the water flowing the other way. This then requires activating green-colored pumps in some other rooms to get the water to open and flow to a path that opens up the boss room itself. Now that's sort of a very broad explanation. The path of progression in this dungeon, it's actually somewhat linear, sort of, with some key areas of deviation or whatever, but it has just enough tricks up its sleeve to actually make itself somewhat confusing, especially for a lot of new players. For starters, like Snowhead, there is just a lot of area that can initially be navigated, and the dungeon kind of just asks you to figure out how the pump and the water flow and stuff like that works, and it requires a bit of backtracking to different areas. For example, early on, when you first encounter the central water room with the current flowing one way, in the water there are two paths that can be taken. There's a lower and a higher path. Both of these have things that you're not able to interact with right away, and some areas you can't get to, but you have to remember to return there nevertheless. The higher portion needs to be tackled first, as it contains the dungeon's sole small key that can then be used in the lower area to obtain ice arrows. Right outside the area where you get the ice arrows, the first switch in the red pipe connection can be turned on, but here also some deviations can start to occur. There's a slim but possible chance that you might not get that first red switch, but furthermore, it has to be understood that you have to follow the red pipe back up to the top pathway where we got the key. One room down this path has a new area that can be reached with the ice arrows to get the red pipe water flowing further, and another room contains a new area that can be reached with the ice arrows to gain the boss key. Now this can also be missed, as the area is also reachable when the main room's flow is reversed, but you do have to get that red pump going to reverse it. But before doing any of this, when you have the ice arrows, there's another deviation that could occur. It's possible to go to this new room, just north of the water wheel room, by freezing a waterfall that's preventing progression, and get the green pipe to start flowing. Though you can't really continue that green pipe path until the water gets reversed. So that active red water pipe, now you can follow it all the way back to the original pump control room, and now the flow can be reversed. But now back in the water wheel room, we've got 2 new paths that can be reached. The lower leads to the boss, which can't really be accessed without getting that green pipe all the way going and continuing it from the upper path. But also the upper path intersects with a lot of the earlier rooms in the dungeon, but from different areas, or, moving with the water flowing in the opposite directions. One of the earlier rooms it intersects with is that aforementioned boss key room. This might sound a little confusing, and I only illustrate this as best as I really can to show all the moving parts that play here in the dungeon, and, trying to articulate why a lot of people find it difficult, even though the amount of things you actually have to do is pretty straightforward. All the backtracking, the water flows pulling you in different directions, and accessing rooms from different points, it can get confusing. It's not a dungeon that you can just easily brute force through. It really requires kind of paying attention and to figure out how all the water pipes flow and connect. And, although you can change the flow of the water in the main room back and forth, you really only have to do it that one time. But this can still be, trickier for some people compared to something like Ocarina of Time's Water Temple, which actually has a great deal more keys and requires altering the level of the water multiple times. This not somehow, but this can be actually more difficult, even though you don't actually have as many parts to the dungeon as a whole. Once again, you also have other things thrown into the mix, like the stray fairies. They create another nice little collectible in the dungeon, of course. A few more things to touch on in the dungeon. Once again, the item is an alternative arrow type, which is the ice arrows. And like Snowhead, I kind of touched on how I think these act as kind of a cool skeleton key to a lot of areas in the dungeon, more compared to like offering up this whole new play style. There are a few cute puzzles in the dungeon, though, that require freezing and thawing of like waterfalls and, freezing enemies and using them as platforms, which is kind of cool. But of course, the main kind of item I would say in this dungeon, though, is probably the transformation mask. I didn't really touch on the Zora mask in the last video, and I'm sure many people have strong feelings for how they changed it in the 3D version, but I should say I like it all right. I wish there was a way to do the fast swimming without consuming magic, but I do like the slower speed option for when I want it or when I need it. Unlike Snowhead, which repeated a mini-boss, here we actually get 2 different ones. The first mini-boss is Wart, who is a sort of a callback to Argus from A Link to the Past. He's a big eye with all sorts of little bubbles or whatever around him protecting him, and there's all sorts of strategies you can take for beating him, but I find it really satisfying to just whittle away at all the bubbles protecting the eye. But eventually he gets pretty rowdy and he starts running around the room, and it's kind of annoying, but overall it's a pretty fine mini boss. And the second one it's a rematch of sorts with another one of those frog gecko called dudes, like the one in Woodfall. And this one, he throws like weird blobs at you, and he eventually crawls inside of one of the blobs, or like a collection of all of them, and tries to suck you in. And I think it's pretty cute to beat him. You gotta like freeze the blob he's in, and it shatters into pieces, and then he's exposed. And even though he's like a same kind of enemy, it's a totally different fight than in Woodfall, so pretty solid there. But we gotta talk about a fight that I don't like, and that is actually this dungeon's boss, the Gargantuan masked fish Georg. I know he's different depending on which version of the game you play. I remember him being fine in the N64 version, not amazing, but I didn't hate it. But I do kind of hate the 3DS version, though. Let me know if you agree with this or if there's something I'm missing, but I think the first phase is whatever. He's a fish, he's swimming around, he looks kind of cool, but it's sort of boring. And you just shoot him a bunch for the most part and dodge him if he attacks, but it's really a second phase I hate. It's this underwater phase, and I feel like similar to in Woodfall, you can really tell they wanted to incorporate more elements involving the transformation mask. So he's like swimming around underwater, and he spits out these little fish that can attack, but the way you gotta kill him is by getting him to swallow these spike mines that are underwater. I just found it was very annoying to get him lined up with a spike mine nearby and get him to suck it in, and you have to like knock it free, and I just feel like where he goes is like too random or something. I don't know, I just always feel like I spend way longer in this fight and struggle with it way more than I want to or need to, and it's kind of a stain on me for an otherwise incredible dungeon. But regardless, afterwards we free another one of the guardians, and he tells us we need to help his friend, help their friend. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful moment. And of course, we return the ocean back to its non-murky state, so things are looking good here for the time being. But yeah, like I said, the boss, kind of a stain on an otherwise great dungeon. So it'll be interesting to rank, because I really love the mechanical inner working nature of this dungeon and all the backtracking. And again, it's like Snowhead, it really shows what you can do with the 3D dungeon and to make things kind of interesting navigationally without just there's only one key in the dungeon, Otherwise, it's just really about exploring and understanding the space. So for me, this is an immediate, it's somewhere in the top of the charts. It's a chart topper for me. But it's I think overall I like kind of the layout and the design and everything over Snowhead, and I like it has more unique mini boss, type situation. And yeah, just all around the theme of it is way more interesting. And all those parts really work together really well, but it's like the boss is a killer to me. I hate the boss. It's one of the first bosses I feel that I just despise. Maybe that's too harsh. Is it too much to keep putting to have Wind Waker Wind Waker? Is it too much to have Majora's Mask also dominate the top of the list? I'm sure some people hate these dungeons. Yeah, it's almost oh, I want to put Snowhead above, but no, I think I still want to put this up top. I just love, I love it. Honestly, I do love it. The boss is kind of holds down, but you know what? None of these dungeons are perfect, but Eagle's Tower is pretty solid. with the boss and mini boss situation. But yeah, no, I don't care. I feel like I kind of did enough praising of this dungeon in the video to justify having it at number 1, and that's what it is for me. I think Majora's Mask for me hit on something in terms of 3D dungeon design that I don't even know if they replicate after this. I feel like they get a little cold feet, because I know a lot of people had a hard time with these dungeons, but there's some more standouts later, of course. But yeah, no, I don't care. Number 1 for me. I think I explained myself well enough that I think you guys can get the picture, hopefully. Yeah, let me know what you think about Georg, though. I hate that guy. But everything else about the dungeon I absolutely love. So yeah, number 1. Alright, anyway. We're over halfway there now. We're gonna do probably Iconic Castle next, so yeah, see you next week.